Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted. Broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb. Ohio State squeaks by Indiana 49-26. Another in a long line of games against the Hoosiers where Ohio State, man, the final score does not really do justice for how much of a game Indiana gave the Buckeyes. This was another one of those situations. Ohio State really just clinging to a lead for three quarters, and then eventually the talent disparity, the differential, the athletes, the strength, the will of Ohio State prevailed in the fourth quarter, pulled away for the 23-point win. Ohio State could have done a lot of people in Vegas a big favor, getting inside first and goal with under 2 minutes to go, having a chance to cover that 27-point spread. And I know that is not on Urban Meyer's mind. He does not care about that, nor should he. But it's funny how so close, sometimes these things come so close if you've got money on the game, or, you know, if you're just betting for entertainment purposes, which I hope you are. But it is funny. It could have very much changed on a dime there last couple minutes. The other interesting thing is the possibility that Urban could have thrown one more pass. And I personally am glad he didn't. You know, Dwayne Haskins had 455 yards. Art Schleicher holding the school record at 458 yards. At first and goal, essentially from, I think, the 9-yard line is where it was officially marked when Ohio State went into victory formation the next play. They could have done another pop pass and maybe gotten those 3 or 4 yards to at least tie Haskins in the record book or maybe take the lead. But the problem there, if you do that, you're basically trying to add another score on the scoreboard. And at that point, I just don't think it's worth it. Look, I'm not a big, anti-running up the score guy, but I think there's a time and a place where you just got to be respectful to your opponent. And, I get the argument why some people want to get Dwayne Haskins that record. It's quite an accomplishment, 455 yards, but I don't think you need that individual record to show respect for Haskins. I mean, just the fact he had 455 yards in itself is impressive. And Ohio State made a few attempts on that last drive to get him the record. They threw the ball on third down. Now, granted, that was to extend the drive, but they threw the ball on third down, and then on the following first down, the play right before victory formation, they got Paris Campbell that little pop pass that went for 13 yards. And if it had gone for 17 yards, it would have broken the record. But it's not like they didn't give him a shot. They did. They got a couple opportunities. They came up a few yards short, decided to take a knee, end the ball game. Look, Indiana did nothing to try to tack on another score, and I know some people would say, well, we're not trying to score. We're just trying to get Dwayne Haskins the record, and that's fair, but there are repercussions as far as perception goes when you're inside first and goal, inside the opponent's 10-yard line with under 2 minutes to go, and you're already up 3 touchdowns plus. It just looks bad if you're trying for another touchdown, and that's essentially what you're doing when you're trying to get 4 yards at least when you're on the 9-yard line, because there's a good chance you could wind up getting that extra touchdown if you try to for 4. So I'm glad the way it worked out. It would have been nice to get Haskins that record. He played an amazing game, another 6 touchdown passes for him. That's 3 games now with at least 5 touchdown passes in a single season. And that's incredible. I mean, you look at Big Ten history, that has never been done by a first-year starter in the Big Ten. Really impressive what Haskins is doing right now. I thought he answered the bell, coming back and putting up a game against a decent defense. Indiana is a decent defense. They're actually top 25 in total defense in the country. Really, really impressive to see Haskins respond. Did not handle the downfield passing very well against Penn State, but in this game he did. What can you say about Indiana? Look, you got to give them credit for whatever reason. They are a terror when it comes to playing Ohio State. I don't understand it. I'll ask Kirk Barton and Ross Fulton will be along here in just a few minutes, and we're going to get into the Indiana game more in depth, but I'll ask them why they think this is, because it's perplexing how they wind up giving Ohio State a game. And then to add insult to injury, if it weren't bad enough that, if this were a 3-quarter series, if Indiana and Ohio State were playing 3 quarters every year, gosh, who knows? Ohio State would be pulling these games out by the chin of their teeth to win these. But to add insult to injury, Ohio State's 4-star commitment running back from Indiana, Samson James, has decommitted. He's committing to the Hoosiers. Great get for Indiana. Hard to say what reason this is going to come down to. Was it a playing time issue? Was it a distance issue? It's hard to imagine this being a distance issue when you're within a couple-hour drive of Columbus, 2.5, 3 hours. Hard to imagine this being distance, but you never know. Kids can get homesick a couple hours away. Maybe it's a combination, wanting to play for the hometown team and also depth chart. Maybe schools are recruiting that, hey, look, Mike Weber is coming back. J.K. Dobbins will be there. Brian Snead will be there. Master Teague will be there. They're trying to get Noah Kane. It's very easy to imagine schools say, you're going to get lost in the shuffle there. You're going to get lost in the depth chart. You come to Indiana, and you've got a chance to start from day one. That's appealing, especially when it's the hometown school. So there are a lot of possibilities here. Who knows why Samson James picked that? Maybe we'll get some word from Mark Givler as this materializes a little more and we get more information. I'll have Mark on, and we'll get into that in our next recruiting update either this week or next week. But for right now, Samson James looks like is going to be a Hoosier and not a Buckeye. So college football, before we get into the gist of the Ohio State-Indiana game with Mark and Kirk here in a few minutes, look, I get the Alabama hype, but I went through and looked through the data, and we've talked about Alabama, and I'm kind of looking through the top 5 schools in the country right now. You've got, Alabama 1, you've got Georgia 2, Ohio State 3, and then Clemson 4, Notre Dame 5, and Notre Dame coming up with a big road win on Saturday against Virginia Tech. Notre Dame is not very intimidating offensively. This kind of ties in to what I'm going to talk about here in just a second, but they're averaging just 5.8 yards per play this year. And by contrast, Oklahoma, the best offense in the country, averaging 8.9 yards per play. Alabama, 8.3 yards per play. Georgia, 7.25. And Ohio State, 7.1. Clemson, also hovering just over 7 yards a play. So Notre Dame clearly way behind those schools when it comes to offensive production. Now, to be fair to Notre Dame, they have played a much tougher schedule in terms of the defenses they've played, giving up fewer yards per play than any of those other teams I mentioned. So Notre Dame has played a much tougher schedule. Michigan, by the way, is the top defense in the country. Now, we have to wait and see what the Wolverines do. They've got a gauntlet coming up. Michigan State, Wisconsin, Penn State, those 3 schools. We'll see what Michigan is, I think, after they play those 3 teams. Now, none of those 3 teams have, Penn State maybe, but the other 2 certainly don't have dynamic offenses, which is something we have not seen Michigan have to face yet this year. So keep in mind when I say this, but Michigan's defense giving up just 3.58 yards per play. Ohio State, by contrast, giving up about 5 yards per play. So Michigan's defense has been very, very good, but again, they have not played a dynamic offense. They haven't played a real threatening spread offense, a team that spreads you out, has athletes, very quick, both east-west and north-south. They haven't played that kind of team yet. So I'm going to temper my enthusiasm, if that's what you want to call it, for the Michigan defense. We have seen this song and dance before. We've seen Michigan defenses look really good in the first half of the season and then kind of wilt under pressure against better offenses late in the season. We'll see if that happens here. I don't think it's going to happen as much because I think that Michigan front 4 is really, really good. But I had somebody mention this on Twitter, and I think this is a good point. Michigan plays a smaller rotation defensively, so keep that in mind. Will they wear down against better teams? We'll see. But I want to tie this back into what I was saying about Alabama and some of these other teams. Alabama's competition is really bad. They have not played a single team out of the 6 games they played. Not a single team has given up fewer than the national average of 5.72 yards per play. Every single one of them, 5 out of the 6 teams they've played, I should say, have given up at least 6 yards per play, with Arkansas at 5.89. So Alabama is playing really, really bad defenses. When you adjust for this, I'm going to go into the what if I told you that the difference between Oklahoma and Alabama and the difference between Ohio State and Clemson offensively, both of those differences in adjusted yards per play is actually better by far than the difference between Alabama and Ohio State or Alabama and Georgia. If you adjust for competition based on what the opponents are giving up per play, and basically think of it as a theoretical, what if you played the average college football team, based on what you've done and who you've played, what would your yards per play numbers be expected to look like? When you adjust for those numbers, you've got Oklahoma at 8.5 yards per play, then Alabama at 7.45 yards per play, Ohio State 7.27, Georgia 7.26, 7.27 and 7.26. So the difference between Alabama and Ohio State and Georgia is only about 0.2 of a yard per play. And then Notre Dame and Clemson are hovering both just under 6.5 yards per play. So there's a huge gap between Oklahoma and Alabama, and then a huge gap between Ohio State, Georgia, and Notre Dame, Clemson. But the difference between Alabama and Ohio State and Georgia is not very much. And that's because, again, they are playing some really bad teams. I mentioned a minute ago, Alabama having not played a single team that has an above-average defense in terms of yards per play. Ohio State, meanwhile, 3 out of the 6 teams they've played are above average. TCU giving up 4.5 a play. Penn State 4.75 a play. Indiana, by the way, has had a pretty good defense this year, giving up 4.98 yards per play. So what I'm getting at here, if you were just to look at the hype of these offenses, it's Oklahoma's offense that's actually a juggernaut right now. Unfortunately, as we saw Saturday, Oklahoma's defense is not on Alabama's level. And to be fair, I know some of you are pointing out Alabama is scary because they have that offense and they have a pretty good defense as well. And that's true, although Alabama's defense did give up 31 points and 450 yards to Arkansas on Saturday. So they're not without their issues. But Alabama certainly is a little bit better than Oklahoma when you factor in defense as well. And that's what makes them somewhat scary, is that they can defend and they've got a really good offense. But in terms of just offense, Ohio State and even Georgia right now are really on the same level. I mean, you look at adjusted yards per play, like I said, they're basically the same. Ohio State has done the same type of things that Alabama is doing to their opponents. They've done that against Oregon State. They've done that against Rutgers. They've done that against Tulane. Tulane, by the way, is actually a surprisingly... they're not a good defense, but they're not as bad as you actually think if you look at the numbers. Tulane has already played Ohio State, of course. Memphis is one of the top 3 offenses by raw statistics in the country, and Tulane actually did a really good job defensively against them. So I'm not saying Ohio State's schedule is really good here. I'm just saying Alabama's schedule is really that bad. One interesting note I want people to think about, because this will be fascinating to see how this plays out. Notre Dame is really a key here, because if Clemson and Ohio State keep winning and win the ACC and Big Ten respectively, and Notre Dame goes undefeated, which right now it's looking more and more possible. I'm not going to say probable, because there's still some wiggle room. They could lose a game here. You know, USC's not going to be an easy game at the end of the season, but it's looking more and more possible that Notre Dame runs the table. And if they do, the SEC runner-up could be in big trouble, because if if Ohio State and Clemson win out and Notre Dame wins out, and again, it's only early October, understand before I make any of these points, I'm assuming the qualifier where you have to understand, I realize there's a good chance none of this will play out the way we think it could. There's always losses we don't expect. Ohio State could lose a game. Clemson could lose a game. Notre Dame could lose a game. Understand, we're just talking hypothetical here. I don't expect this all to happen because it almost never does. But if Notre Dame and Clemson went out, Ohio State went out, you got to think an undefeated Notre Dame team is in. You got to think ACC champ undefeated, Big Ten champ undefeated, Clemson, Ohio State are in. That means Alabama and Georgia are battling for the last spot, and that means the loser is out. And I know some of you are thinking, well, if Alabama loses, they're going to put them in. I don't think so. Not a one-loss Alabama team that hasn't played anybody. They will have beaten LSU, I guess, in that scenario, and maybe they will have beaten Auburn, although I'm not sure how much of a win Auburn is going to be the way that Auburn offense is looking right now. But I'm not sure in that situation a one-loss Alabama gets in over an undefeated Notre Dame. And they're certainly not getting in over an undefeated Clemson or Ohio State. And what happens to the Big 10 or Big 12 champ? Let's say a one-loss Texas or a one-loss Oklahoma or an undefeated West Virginia team is in that mix. Does a two-loss, even if Notre Dame loses, does a one-loss Notre Dame team or a one-loss Alabama team that doesn't win its SEC title, does it get in over the Big 12 champion? I just got to say this. If Alabama, the point I'm trying to make here is I'm wrapping it up in the long-winded way. If this season ends with, let's say, Georgia beating Alabama in the SEC title game and Alabama having one loss, if it gets in again over an undefeated West Virginia, an undefeated Notre Dame, or maybe even a one-loss Big 12 champ, that's Oklahoma or Texas or something of that nature, especially Texas when you consider that Texas would not have lost a game since the very first week of the year. If that happens again, where Alabama gets in over those teams not playing anybody, oh, I'm telling you what, ladies and gentlemen, this podcast is going to be lit because I am going to revolt. And if that happens again, then we're going to have to scrap this whole system. We're going to have to scrap the selection committee, go back to the BCS formula, picking the teams. Do what you have to do. But if this happens a second year in a row where Alabama gets in with one loss, not winning their title, when there are other conference champs that would be deserving, then the whole system needs scrapped because it's not working. You say you have this criteria of rewarding conference champs, and if that doesn't happen again to a team that didn't play anybody, and look, Alabama's probably a top 4 team. Not saying they aren't. As much as I'm degrading what they've done so far, I think they might be the best team in America. I just think the margin is a lot smaller than people are giving them credit for, okay? But you can be the best team in the country and not necessarily be deserving of getting in. And if that happens in this scenario again, Alabama will not have more than maybe one impressive win all season. And, hey, look, in that situation, I'm sorry. You're good. You might be the defending champs, but that doesn't mean you should be in. So, all I'm saying, a lot of scenarios can play out here. Alabama may end up throttling everybody on their way to an undefeated season, and it may not be close. That could happen. But right now, I'm just saying they're not the juggernaut people are making them out to be, and this playoff scenario will be interesting to watch. But let's turn our attention to Ohio State, Indiana, and we'll dissect what happened Saturday in Ohio State's 49-26 win against Indiana.
Ross Fulton is here with his whiteboard to break down what the Buckeyes and their opponents are doing on the field. Can't see the whiteboard? Close your eyes and imagine really hard. It's time to go inside the X's and O's with Ross.
Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever.
All right, I'm here with Kirk and Ross now, and we're going to dissect this game yesterday. So Ohio State gives up another 26 points to Indiana. It's funny, I mentioned this at the start of the show, and I mentioned this on Twitter yesterday. It's Indiana, if college football were 3 quarters long, Indiana would be a terrifying rival for Ohio State because there's something about this team. I don't know what it does to Ohio State, but Kirk, I'll start with you. Like, what the heck is it with this Indiana program that gives Ohio State fits year in, year out for 3 quarters, and then, I mean, eventually Ohio State's talent does take over and win the game in the 4th, but it's just so strange. Every year it's almost like a carbon copy.
Oh, they've got very good scheme, but it's just, that uniform. It's like if we put them in like a Michigan State uniform or a Wisconsin uniform, these kids get really caught up in star rankings and, we have all 4 and 5 stars in our team. They only have 2 stars. I've never seen these guys at a camp before. And then, kids that like in Indiana or in Iowa, they've got a huge chip on their shoulder when they get a chance to play Ohio State, who probably didn't give them the time of day in recruiting. And sometimes this stuff happens. I mean, I was on staff in 2012 when we won, it was 42-39 in Bloomington. And it was like, I've never seen Urban Meyer more angry in my entire life than that. After that game and that following Sunday film. So I don't know what it is. I just think that, when you play in Iowa or in Indiana and you don't see these kids on the camp circuits, you don't see them at the opening, it just kind of festers into the games where they're just like, we're just physically better than these guys, which we are. But those guys played great. I mean, they put up yards, they made plays, and it's just how it is.
Yeah, I definitely don't. I almost don't want to degrade them because I thought they had a great game plan and they executed really well. Peyton Ramsey had struggled to hit downfield throws, and to his credit, he hit some on Saturday. So,
and I mean, they're 4-1 coming in, so it's not like they're the old Indiana that's like 1-4. I mean, they're 4-1 coming into the game. Yeah,
this has been a quietly very, very good program the last few years, and they're in a really tough division, so their win totals maybe don't reflect it. But this has been a very competitive team. So, Ross, you and I were talking earlier, and what is it? So, Ohio State, once again, quietly in the second half, and it came out and played a much better game than it did in the first half. And we've seen this trend. It did so against Penn State, played better in the second half. TCU played a lot better second half. I know yesterday, or Saturday specifically, you could attribute some of that success to Isaiah Pryor coming in, obviously sitting out the first half because of the previous week targeting call. And I think Pryor is well ahead of Wentz as far as talent and ability and certainly production. So I think that's part of it, but we've seen this trend. So what do you think it is that is causing the Ohio State defense to struggle so much in the first half and then kind of regain its composure as the game goes along?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just teams are, this applies to what Kirk said applies to coaching staffs too. I mean, for the Indiana coaching staff, they see Ohio State every year. It's the biggest game on their schedule. Conversely, Ohio State comes back from playing at Penn State. The team doesn't get back till probably 4 a.m. So, it's kind of to be expected that you're going to have a little bit of a disparity in terms of focus and attention going to that game. But I think the big part of it was Pryor coming in. Another thing that people have to keep in mind is that Ohio State's defensive line is very beat up right now. Obviously, Nick Bosa is out. You have Draymond Jones and Robert Landry, who are both nursing injuries. So there was very little pass rush in the first half. And whether that's a combination of injuries or focus. And, it's impossible. No one can cover in man coverage for 7-8 seconds. It can't do it. So, in the second half, they got a little bit better pass rush. If you squint hard, you could say they did a little bit more just straight up base, cover one, less zone blitzing, and just basically let people play a little bit more.
Yeah, I thought that was a great point because I didn't think Ohio State was getting the type of pressure with its front four on Saturday that we normally see, and I definitely thought that contributed to the downfield passing. I didn't think the downfield passing was necessarily it probably had a worse game than we've seen, but I didn't think it was that bad when you consider that Ohio State was not getting its token pressure that it usually gets, and that may be, a residual effect of all those injuries that you talked about. There is a lot of panic right now about Ohio State's defense, and I mentioned this stat on Twitter. I looked this up myself. The run defense, absolutely not a problem. When you look at the run defense, they've given up 858 yards total this year, which is 4 yards a carry. That's substandard for Ohio State's normal defense. But 7 of those 213 carries have gone for over 20 yards, and those 7 carries have comprised almost half, 408 out of 858. And in the other 206 carries, they're only giving up 2 yards a carry, basically. So, Kirk, it's like I feel like the run defense, outside of those few big plays here and there, has absolutely been dominant most of the year. It's just those long touchdown runs are kind of skewing people's perception of it a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like you looked at, I mean, starting off the season with Oregon State, we gave up some long ones, and it's just something where it's really disappointing, and it's something that they're going to need to get fixed when they actually play a team that has close to the same amount of talent that we do, because these are coming against teams that are vastly inferior talent-wise to Ohio State, and they're able to break these off. So it's like if we're going against, like Clemson, who averaged 11 yards a carry and ran for 470 yards yesterday, like I can't imagine what they would do if we don't get this fixed. So, guys need to get back. They need to get healthy. And, the rotations being all screwed up is, I think, the most difficult part of all the injuries and nursing the guys and, treating Indiana like it's Indiana. So, like, oh, we're playing Indiana, so we don't need this guy we only need him for 10 plays instead of the whole game. Or, we can sit this guy because it's Indiana. Like, all that stuff kind of, it builds up. And, when you have guys playing more snaps than they're used to and they get worn down, you get gashed. And that's something that is a big concern coming down the stretch in terms of health.
Ross, specifically on these runs, do you see anything different that we've seen in past seasons that are happening to cause these longer runs? In my opinion, I want you to tell me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like nothing much different is going up with the front seven. I feel like the only difference is in the past, we'd see one of these runs that the safety would head off for maybe a 7 to 12 yard gain, and that's the end of the play. But the only difference now is the safeties are taking bad angles or getting blocked out of the play, and now these 7 to 10, 15 yard gains we'd see in the past are becoming the 80 yard touchdowns. Is that what's going on here, or do you see anything else?
Exactly. It's the safety angle from the deep safety. They're just very poor. If in film session, you could definitely break that down. I mean, Ohio State had a scrape exchange and Chase Young didn't come down hard enough on the H-back blocking back, which created the hole. And so, so it was the getting past the initial line was enabled by that. But exactly, that should have been a 15-yard gain instead of a 45-yard gain.
And there you have the big play issue. In the past, Ohio State's big plays were the 15, maybe 20-yard plays. Now they're becoming 80-yard touchdowns. That's what we're not seeing from the Ohio State defense this year, is just those few big plays that we are seeing. Instead of 20 yards, they're now 80 yards. And that I think, is the only difference going on here. Because the Ohio State run game, like I said, 206 out of 213 carries, they're giving up just 2 yards a carry. That's excellent. I mean, if you look around college football right now, every team in the country, including Alabama, would love to be at that mark. So, and that brings us to another issue that I want to talk about, because we were discussing this before we started recording. This is a college football issue. I think people's paradigm needs to change now. Like Alabama on Saturday gave up 31 points and like 450 yards to a really bad Arkansas team. And it's not that Alabama's defense is bad. This is just, Kirk, this is a new normal in college football. The days where you expect a silver bullet defense to come out and give up 10 points a game and 220 yards a game, I think those days are over, outside of an exceptional circumstance.
Yeah, I agree, because I just think it's, with the basketball on grass and the way the game's changed over the last 15 years or so, I mean, scores are higher, there's more yardage. I feel like rules are slanted more to help the offenses be explosive, and and with no huddle and with spread and with and really like general skill development across the country. I mean, you've got kids, they're playing in 7-on-7 camps. There's so many more camps and things that kids go to. So there's a lot more development, a lot more skill. So a lot of these teams that used to be not quite as talented have guys that can really play. It's like if you look at Indiana, I mean, they've put Tevin Coleman, Jordan Howard. I mean, they put some really good running backs into the league the last few years, and it's one of those things where I'm just happy to win. I know that's silly because everyone has to be angry about everything, but it's like I told you guys before the game. I just want us to win every game we play by 1 point this year. If we win every game we play by 1 point, then it's a great year.
Yeah, Rush, you talked about this. I mean, it's like 10 years ago, there was a lot of spread, but there was still a lot of pro-style. Now there are still some pro-style teams, but even the pro-style teams are doing, some spread concepts. And, like, you look at teams like Syracuse, what they did to a very good Clemson defense in the first half of that game last week. Just look all around, and this is a common issue. It's like it's really tough to stop a team with a spread offense for a full 60 minutes of a game.
Yeah, I mean, just the sheer number of plays, if nothing else, with no huddle. Teams are running 70 or 80 plays now, and they used to run 40 or 50. So you're just by the odds. I mean, as I was saying before the show, I was watching Texas Oklahoma yesterday, and Oklahoma's running RPOs where they have linemen 7 yards downfield. And so if an offense can get away with that, it's just, I don't know how any defense can stop that for 4 quarters. I mean, it should be noted that Ohio State fans tend to be glass half empty or keg half empty, whatever you want to use. But they, for all the problems in the first half, the Ohio State defense pretty much shut Indiana down the second half. And those 2 drives where Indiana got the ball in Ohio State territory back to back, that could have really made it a game. And Ohio State forced them, 3 and out both times or close to it. So it was, there's things that you can certainly rooms for improvement, but I don't think it's completely broken.
Yeah, if people take anything away from this podcast today, I don't want anyone hearing us and say, well, Ohio State doesn't have any problems. We're not saying that. There are certainly some issues that Urban Meyer and his defensive staff are going to have to continue to tackle if they want to have a chance to win a national title. Because when you get in a case where you're playing Georgia and Alabama back-to-back or Notre Dame and Alabama back-to-back or whatever, yeah, they're going to have to address these things. But all we're saying is some of these problems are not as bad as they seem, and they're issues that are happening all across college football. I want to jump to the offensive side of the ball now because, not surprisingly, Dwayne Haskins had a stellar game, and by stellar I mean 455 yards passing, which was just 3 short of the Ohio State single game record held by Art Schlichter back in 1981. Kirk, I thought this was interesting. Like, there were some people actually that were kind of complaining after the game that Ohio State did not get him that record. And by the time they got to 455, they were first and goal inside the 10 with under 2 minutes to go. I don't see a reason at that point to rub it in. I think it would be clearly running up the score if you try to get him that record. But regardless, he had a great game. I'm curious your thoughts on that, though.
I mean, if there's one thing I know, and I can say with certainty, is if there's a record out there and Urban Meyer can get it without rubbing someone's nose in it, he's going to get it. But, there comes a point where it's like, oh, really? Like, I mean, it's almost silly when you're playing an opponent that kind of gave you all they could give you, and it's like to rub their nose in it is, when, like, they've never had any bad blood. It's not like it's Brett Bielema who accused Urban of cheating so there's not, or Mark Richt, where he had the excessive celebration in 2000, I believe it was like 7 or 8, when they all jumped on the field with the Georgia guys. I mean, it's one of those things where I get not getting it, but Coach Meyer is the king of records. Like, he wants to have every record in the history of football. So it's like if there's a rushing record or a school record for most wins or whatever, like, and that's his thing. But I don't know. I'm happy that Dwayne is progressing. Obviously, I think that he's gonna have to carry us just because our running game's not ticking the way I was hoping it would be, and but he's a special guy. He's a special talent, and I'm enjoying him right now.
Ross, I thought was interesting is that against Penn State, Haskins did not hit the downfield throws. He was not good at that. He did not handle the pressure very well. I thought against Indiana, I mean, we knew he could hit downfield throws. That wasn't an issue. It's just, could he do it when he had feeling the pressure a little bit where he has to set his feet? And he did that a couple times with great success against Indiana. There was one time where he had a blitz coming onto his right. He had to jump and quickly set his back foot, and then he launched that downfield touchdown pass to Johnny Dixon. Or maybe that was to Terry McLaurin. I can't remember which one. I might be getting them mixed up. But the point is, though, I thought he handled those throws, getting his feet set and throwing the ball downfield, just absolutely stellar on Saturday.
Yeah, it definite improvement. I mean, obviously a little bit friendlier environment. Back to this. I mean, Haskins is benefiting from what's hurting the run game, which is that teams are just loading the box. I mean, you can't block when you have 6 guys, when you have five offensive linemen in the tight end, and teams are going to put 7 guys in the box or 8 guys. You can't blame the offensive line or the running game for having an unblocked defender. I couldn't tell you how many times yesterday Ohio State's running backs were tackled by the backside unblocked edge runner. So you don't have a quarterback who can run. So you just got to keep throwing the football. The best thing you can do for the run game is to keep throwing. And Haskins and the right wide receivers will continue to benefit when teams are using single coverage, or Indiana was sometimes using inverted cover too, which is about like the most aggressive run defense you can show. And I mean, they got burned for it.
Ross, I want to stay with you real quick before we jump to Kirk on this question. because that kind of segues to our next issue. Like, the offensive line definitely has been, I don't want to say a disappointment because they haven't been bad. Pass protection has been, I thought, pretty good this year by the offensive line. The run game has been very inconsistent, and they're not showing any signs of being able to dominate the line of scrimmage on the 3rd and short, 4th and short, or, you know, in the general, like fourth quarter yesterday, there was no sign that they were going to be able to take over the game in the fourth quarter and just run the ball and run the clock out. Now, you mentioned teams stacking the box. Now, this is not anything new. Obviously, teams have been stacking the box for several years. I mean, basically, the entire J.T. Barrett era, they were stacking the box. So what is it about this year, maybe, outside of possibly, you know, the offensive line not performing as well? What is it that is causing so many problems for Ohio State this year as opposed to in years past?
Not having the quarterback to re-equate numbers in the run game. When Indiana would do that, I mean, I remember 2 years ago when Ohio State beat Indiana with J.T. Barrett running 25 times. And they used probably a similar defense, but you had a tailback that could act as the fullback, and suddenly your 6 blockers become 7, and you have a ball carrier. And so, you know, those short yardages, I could diagram them up for you in both of them. Indiana was in cover 0. There was Ohio State had no chance to block all the players that were in the hole. There were 2 free hitters in the hole. Michael Jordan took one, and the other one just sitting there because he's a free safety. So, you know, on the last play, occasionally Ohio State's just going to have to throw the ball in short yardage. On the last, right before the touchdown throw to Ben Victor, there was a 3rd and 1, and Ohio State rolled Haskins out left. It was a great throw, getting his feet reset and throwing, but it was an easy completion because it was just a soft corner coverage with 9 guys in the box. So all this is to say I have some sympathy for the O-line getting beat up. You can only block so many guys, and you can't blame someone when they account for their assignments and there's free defender sitting in the hole.
Now, Kirk, I've got another question for you based on what Ross said there. Not only in addition to having in the past, you know, J.T. Barrett was able to account for those numbers because of his running ability, but I also want to ask, does Dwayne Haskins have the same ability to change the play call at the line? And if so, is it possible that also maybe he's not recognizing, you know, these numbers as well as J.T. Barrett did? Because, you know, that was Barrett's strength right there. He could see the numbers, he could see the defense, and he was able to change the play in part because he had that freedom, and he also was, you know, able to see that so easily. Is that maybe possibly a part of what's going on here where if Haskins isn't changing that at the line, or he's not seeing those numbers?
No, I don't think that's an issue at all. I think that Dwayne's brilliant, and really the only times we really check the stuff is when we're going against cover 0. Like if they're in full on man to man and they're bringing 6 guys, then that's when we'll do some audible work. But you know, normally we don't have, I guess, full autonomy to just, you know, dial up whatever play you want, like, you know, like a Peyton Manning or like an NFL guy would. Usually we're running with what it is, unless we know it's going to be, you know, a devastatingly bad play. You know, so we'll get out of that. But generally, it's not, you know, it's not like you can switch it from, you know, like an option one way to a, you know, deep pass the other way. I mean, it's just not what we do. But in terms of the offensive line, just to touch on that, I mean, I think that, you know, our guards have to play better. We've had some really lazy holding calls. You know, it's like when you sit and watch, you know, a TV replay, and when you see the fabric stretch on the jersey, there's no doubt you're going to get called. I mean, it's like running a red light and hitting a car that's going through that's got the green light. You know, I mean, you're going to get cited for it, and it's just like there's no doubt about it. And I used to tell guys that, I'm like, look, if you feel like if you're gripping them up and you feel that jersey start to stretch, or if you know, if your arm's extended and that umpire can see that hand, let go. Because, like, it's better to let go and let the quarterback have a chance to step around him or run from him than it is to get a 10-yard penalty. Or, you know, if you're blocking downfield for a running back or second level for running back, it's better to take a 4-yard gain than for the running back to break off 20, but you're bringing it back because of a holding call. You know, it's like, I used to coach guys, and I'm like, you know, I get it. I mean, you hold on every play, but you got to be smart about it, because if it's egregious, you're just going to get called for it. And Demetrius had 2 really bad ones yesterday, and I was like, you can't do it.
Kirk, one last subject I want to touch on here before we wrap it up. The receivers definitely showing signs of coming around. You know, we had a couple games there where the receivers were dropping passes uncharacteristically. I know Austin Mack obviously was a big culprit there against TCU, but the receivers really have stepped up, and this is the second game now where we saw Ben Victor step up and make a couple big plays. That catch he had in the end zone was not quite as impressive as the catch he had against Penn State, but really, really close. But the guy I really want to touch on, Terry McLaurin, because he has become, I know Urban Meyer keeps calling him another Evan Spencer, and that's really become an apt because his blocking has been sensational, and he's catching the ball consistently, running great routes, and catching it, which was his problem last year, as he had a lot of dropsies last year. But this year, he's catching everything in sight. It's amazing to see what these receivers have started to do in the last couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a product of great recruiting, great coaching. I mean, I know I'll take some stuff for this, but I mean, Zach Smith kind of built that room recruiting-wise, and it's like, those kids, they block because of Zach and Urban and now Brian Hartline, but those guys, they block like crazy for each other. They're talented. They root for each other. They're not about their numbers. It's just like one of those. It's like a fun group to watch because it just seems like it's not like the kind of the Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster dynamic right now, where Juju's putting up the numbers and AB's kind of whining about it. I mean, you can tell that he's not in the right spot because he's not number one in the league in receptions and yards and TDs like he normally is. So it's a really fun group to watch. Again, like Ben Victor, in my opinion, is head and shoulders above everyone in that room, but he just has to keep his head on straight. He's he's not in terms of off the field Josh Gordon, but like talent wise, he can be like Josh Gordon. Like it's like teach him like 3 routes and yell at him to block, and the kid won't have to worry about anything the rest of his life because he's just that talented. He's that big. And, he made the play of the year last week, and he keeps getting better. So hopefully down the stretch, he'll be a big factor for us at the X.
Ross, and you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the offensive line and some of these 3rd and 4th and shorts that maybe Ohio State just needs to pass more, with the receivers playing so well across the board as they are. Is that a lack of faith, or is that just trying so hard to get that running game going and establish an identity?
I mean, Kirk obviously knows Urban Meyer a lot better than I do. My read on that situation yesterday is that I think Urban Meyer is a little stubborn, and against an Indiana, it's 3rd and short, and he's going to run tight. They want to run tight zone and prove that they can block it no matter if Indiana throws 22 bodies in there. But again, it's Indiana, so sometimes you use games like that to do things other than just what's the most efficient. You're trying to set the tone, etc. I think that you will see in games where they're playing a more even opponent that they will do things like, slip the tight end out and throw in those situations a little more. And who knows, maybe even go under center and run a QB sneak if they're really getting crazy.
And follow-up question for you, Ross. Do you see defenses starting to get out of this loading the box, with Ohio State's pass game as prolific as it's been, especially, if you're putting up 455 yards against a decent Indiana defense? Do you see them eventually getting away from that if Ohio State keeps passing like this, or are they going to ride this out and take away Ohio State's run game the rest of the year?
I mean, you would think eventually, but I tend to still think teams are going to ride out because for as much as Ohio State fans want to say there's a problem with the run game, the simplest way teams know that they're going to get beat is if they let J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber run right over them. And I think it's hard. History is very ingrained over the last 6 years of Urban Meyer Ohio State offenses. It's just going to be hard for opponents that are used to game planning for Ohio State and to be a certain way to adjust. And I think we'll continue to see it. I think also that just in general, college football coaches are, when in doubt, going to try to take away the run game.
Ohio State will play Minnesota at noon on Saturday. Final thoughts, gentlemen. Kirk, how do you see Ohio State playing out with the issues with the offensive line and also on defense in the secondary? How do you see these things playing out here and improving over the next few weeks with Minnesota, Purdue, Nebraska on the schedule? These are an opportunity to continue to get well going into those big games in November. How do you see that playing out, Kirk?
I think they're just going to keep rotating the pieces and find the right ones. And a 6'7" piece that hopefully will be back soon is Brandon Bowen, who played really well last year, moving inside the guard, which he'd never played before. And, hopefully he'll, put some heat on the two guys playing both guard spots to get a little bit better. But, we're honestly really fortunate with the schedule that we have with, like I said last week, like we're in the middle of the creme brulee right now. And it's like, it'll get hard on the edge, like when we get to the end, but we're not like some of these guys are getting ready to go play Georgia and Bama, and like they got like these crazy schedules. Like we got like a nice little soft spot right here where we can find out who can really play, and hopefully we'll start blowing these teams out so we can build some depth and get the other guys in, because that's like the thing that's hard is like when we're playing a team like Indiana, if we can really put it on them and then get Tate Martell in and get Master T, like some of these like younger running backs in, I think it does nothing but help you down the stretch, just because it's gonna be a long season. Like these seasons are really long now, because I mean since I played, they had the Big Ten championship, they have a college football playoff, and you're playing 15 games. You need all hands on deck, and you need to find guys that can play special teams and take guys like Terry McLaurin and Okuda off of being gunners on punt, which is ridiculous. I mean, there's guys on scholarship that can run down and cover a punt and let those guys get a break every now and then. So it's going to be an interesting stretch to the season. But the biggest motivation that these guys have, if you're a position coach, is you never want to be the lowest one on the efficiency group in the Woody Hayes, because whatever one that is, an Urban's going to be like riding you, like I said the Seattle Sleep thing earlier. But if you're the linebackers coach, or if you're the secondary, two coaches, or the O-line coach, like whoever's playing the worst or the bottom 2 or 3, Urban is all over you, like today and during the week. So you just want to get out of that group. So there's plenty of motivation by these coaches to get these players to go better.
Ross, how do you see this team a month from now going to East Lansing, which I know the Spartans have not been very good this year, but that's still going to be a tough game. I don't think anybody thinks any differently. How do you see this team as an identity, where they're at now? Where will they be a month from now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still, I think you want to use these games to continue to prove. I know people are down on the defense. I still see improvements that are being made amongst inexperienced guys. I think you want to get everyone healthy, and you want to continue to work on, I wouldn't say the run game per se. You want to be able to work on situationally how you're going to handle those short yardage situations, which still continue to, bedevil them a little bit without having the quarterback run as a crutch in those situations.
All right, fellas, that's going to wrap it up today. Ross Fulton, you can catch him on Twitter at Ross R. Fulton. Kirk Barton, Kirk_Barton. Of course, you can catch both of them with me on BuckeyeGrove.com. As always, I appreciate it, fellas. Everybody wanting to listen to the podcast, of course, you can catch us Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. This Friday, I will preview Ohio State, Minnesota, and also be talking a little bit of Ohio State basketball. I'll get into what I think of the E.J. Liddell commitment and what Ohio State basketball looks for this year and beyond. So catch the Unscripted Ohio podcast every Monday and Friday. As I said, you can also catch us on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. Appreciate the listen. Have a great week, everybody. We'll catch you again on Friday.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.